Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. And tonight we have a very special guest, Patrick Lussier, renowned editor, director, writer. Patrick, thank you so much for being here with us. How are you doing?
Great, great. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. It is our honor to have you. And I want to get started right away with the editing portion of your career, which is
Mm.
extensive. You, from what I can tell, have been editing since like the late 80s, early 90s. So you have seen
Yeah.
the advancement of technology all the way to where it is today with editing. Uh, you know, how do you feel on how far things have come in the last, 30 years in regards to motion picture, television editing, and the technology that's out there?
I mean, it's huge leaps and bounds. I came in just at the tail end of film, although I was never paid to cut film. And film lasted for a number of years afterwards. People still editing on film. So, celluloid
Mm-hmm.
strips,
Mm-hmm.
35 millimeter, 24 frames per second. Where all that information comes from. And But we cut initially on a thing called a montage, which was 17 Beta Max, not Beta Cam, Beta Max drives that would shuttle and queue up and try and queue up sections of a show to play. So I started on the Hitchhiker, which is one of the very first HBO quote unquote dramas. It
Yeah.
was basically sort of a horror thriller, yuppies run amok, 1986, 1985. And I guess they went on to about, 1990, and it was their last season. But it was, it was always how much gratuitous violence and nudity can you pack into 22 minutes?
Exactly. Exactly.
um, and HBO, of course, has changed a lot since then,
Oh yeah.
or not at all. But they had great directors and stuff. Philip Noyce had directed episodes, and Colin Butsey, who's a big TV director, had directed episodes, and they had all sorts of different types at the time. So,
So
um,
as the technology evolved in the 90s into the 2000s into what it is
mm.
today, did you find yourself learning on the job? How did you find adjusting from how things were done to how things are done today?
Yeah, it's on one hand it's a lot different. On the other hand, it's an editing system, whether it's the montage or the Ediflex or film or the Avid or Final Cut when that had its moments in the sun or whatever is the whatever you're cutting on now on your phone or whatever. They're all just hammers. They're just a tool. How you use it is how you use it. So yeah, I learned new equipment on the job, and different equipment had different things that it was good at. Each one sort of allowed you to do different things in a certain way. But at the end of the day, the story and the drama and the what's in front of you is what dictates everything.
Exactly.
I learned early on from a couple of different editors, Michael Robeson and Mike Elliott, that the philosophy of you cut with your gut, not your head.
Yeah.
You have to feel everything you edit. So if it's a scary scene, you have to be editing on the edge of your seat. If it's a romantic scene, you have to be willing to be on the verge of tears or whatever. You have to be the third party in the scene
Mm-hmm.
in order for them to work.
Absolutely. Now, as a video editor, in post production, you work with the director very closely, I assume,
Hmm.
producers, the sound people. Uh, how much autonomy does a video editor have when it comes to films? Does it vary depending on the project?
Yeah, it varies completely, and the director usually, it's the amount of trust the director has. With Wes Craven, he and I ended up with a really great shorthand, so I would handle a lot of the day to day with composers and with visual effects and with the sound and everything like that. He would always have specific things at spotting sessions, and then I would oversee all the everything until it got to the stage, and then Wes would come in and do all the final things. But he gave me a lot of creative input, which allowed me when I made the switch into directing. It was an amazing way to learn because he was always there to sort of also, pull back on the reins. Oh, and a little less this, a little more that, and had, he was a great mentor and teacher as well as somebody who gave you a lot of trust to collaborate.
Now, you and Wes have worked on a lot of projects together. Would you call you
Mm-hmm.
guys, were you guys good friends?
Yeah, I think so. I think, in as I went on to direct afterwards, certainly from Valentine on, we sort of drifted apart a bit in the last few years of his life, unfortunately, just because I got busy doing other things and he was busy doing other things. And it was just one of those things that we weren't in the same place or in the same time. And,
Yeah.
and, and, you'd reach out at birthdays and Christmas and different times like that. But certainly when we were in the height of working together, we would, spend a lot of time together we would travel here, there, and everywhere, to New York or to wherever, we were previewing or all those different things as the journeys required. You couldn't really help but be close just because these were the people you saw every day.
Exactly.
Wes and Dana Redondo and Tina Anderson, the two post people who worked with us, and who were always right there all through production, and Marianne Madeleine, the producer and stuff. It was, we were all sort of thick as thieves for a time. And then as each of us sort of began to branch out and do other things, it's just like life. You begin to sort of drift apart and then
Exactly.
come back together. And then suddenly it's like, oh, you wish you could buy back all the time you were apart to spend together, just because you realize that suddenly one of you is gone, and or two of you are gone,
Yeah.
and it's just like, oh crap, how
Yeah,
did that happen?
it's sad. Now, in
Hmm.
2000, you made the jump from the post production editing room to being behind the camera as a director with Prophecy 3 and the very successful Dracula 2000. How did you go from editor to director? How did that all play out?
I had started doing a little bit of directing on MacGyver, the original MacGyver series back in the 80s. Where I started editing, I had done some inserts. MacGyver used to be 8 days of main unit photography, 2 days of second unit photography that didn't have Richard Dean Anderson, but was still basically main unit, and then 3 days of inserts for all the MacGyverisms. So I remember starting on a couple episodes of that, like trying to make a bulldog, Winston the bulldog, who was in Stakeout with Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez, disarm a bomb. Winston did not disarm bombs. It wasn't any really on his CV, so that was a little harder than one expected. And then I had to do another one where I had to disarm a bomb with a feather. That seemed to be the thing I got to do in the early days. And then I did a few, inserts, little second unit things for Wes along the way on a little bit on Vampire in Brooklyn, a little bit on Scream 2 and Scream 3. And then Dimension offered me the chance when I went on to edit Halloween H2O. I
Hmm.
ended up supervising all the posts of that because Steve Miner had another job. He was going off to direct Lake Placid, so he finished shooting very quickly. He went off to direct Lake Placid and came down only for a couple of days to mix, and the director's cut was very quick. It was like a
Hmm.
day and a half. So I oversaw a lot of the post of that, and as that, as part of the quote unquote reward for that, they said, "We'll kick your ass if you want to direct for us." So Prophecy came up, and it was a great chance to work with Joel Sasson, and we had Christopher Walken for 7 days, and we had a pretty interesting script, I thought, and managed to, like a few weeks up from production, there was a note from Dimension Films. This character that had one line. Suddenly, they wanted to make her the lead in the story. The character that was the hero, they wanted to make the villain. The whole sort of ending and B storyline that ran through, it suddenly was completely different. But as Joel said, you have to love every mutant child as you go forward. So we did the best we could in what we landed. It was a lot of fun.
and it
Fana was great. Brad Dourif was great.
and it
Yeah,
worked out. And
yeah.
so by the time it came and you really, took the reins of a director, it would be fair to say that you felt very comfortable being behind the camera.
Yeah, comfortable's around. I just finished directing something like last week, and I will tell you, you're never really comfortable. You get more confident, and I find every morning you start with a vague feeling of absolute terror that until you start seeing it, and then you block it once and you see it, and you see the actors do it. You're like, okay, well, okay, this will work. I won't get fired today. But it's I think the fear of failure is a good thing.
Yeah,
The fear of wanting to do better every time and wanting to find new ways to do things and the different parameters that you have and with the different budgets that you're given. Yes, I would say more confident, more knowledgeable, but at the same time, it's still everything you do is always different, and
yeah,
everything is just like it's an uphill shit fight. So
exactly. And it keeps you on
yeah,
your toes. And that's the whole point,
it
to keep you
does.
on your
It
toes.
does, and that is the point. If it became the same thing every day, day in and day out, it would be like working in a factory.
Now,
Uh,
when it came time for Dracula 2000, that
mm,
is a script that you took part in writing. Uh, what was that
mm,
like? I mean, you have several writing credits, all
hmm
three of the Dracula movies that you directed and wrote. So, what is it like seeing a project from writing it through the directing experience and having that control?
It's always the first draft you write, you try to write it responsibly to the budget you might have, but they're always generally bigger and more robust and have more things, and you're not writing them for a specific location. You're writing for them often for the location in your head, which doesn't exist. And then you're faced with the production realities of, oh, you mean we can't get a tank? We can't do this, we can't do that, and it's like, oh, okay, well, let's and one by one you sort of start molding it into what it can be. The most exciting part is casting, and I've never really had a project where this didn't happen, where you started to audition actors and then you rewrote one part specifically based on an audition that completely changed how you saw a character.
Wow.
The cast are the final stewards and the final owners of the characters. So as such, once you hand the characters over to them, you have to have that trust to let them breathe the life into them that coach and guide to the reality, but at the same time, they're the ones who have to walk it.
Hmm.
They're the ones who have to slip on that skin and make it theirs. So there's been several times where just an actor will do something in an audition that is just like, oh my God, I did not ever see this that way. And it's always exciting to witness that and go, okay, now we have an opportunity to reshape this part to become something else and to become, and it always makes the characters deeper when you do that,
Exactly. And
in my experience.
I've heard a lot of directors say 70% of directing is casting, and just
Oh,
get out of their
yeah.
way.
Yeah. And the actor who taught me the most about working with actors is Rucker Hauer.
Oh,
We only had him for a few days on Dracula 3.
speaking of the
Um,
Hitcher,
in
the Hitcher. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, in Romania, and Rucker was just he was a fascinating guy. He was very thoughtful. He was a real sort of poet, and he would he came days early. He dressed it was just before Christmas. He dressed up as Santa Claus for the crew. He dressed up as Santa Claus and went to orphanages in Bucharest, and I think he did acting classes for the local drama school as Hamlet as a vampire.
See, that's
But you
great.
know,
Those are
yeah,
the stories you don't get to hear, and I love hearing that. I have no idea. I
yeah,
love Rutger Hauer as an actor, and all the
yeah.
stuff he's
But
done.
he was just very generous, a very generous soul, and his advice of, I'd learned a lot from Wes about watching him work with actors, and I'd seen a lot of that firsthand. And but Rucker was like, it's great that you're prepared, but
Hmm.
you have to trust us to do it.
Yeah.
And it was his advice was positively liberating, right? Because suddenly it was like this huge weight that you got to share with somebody else, as opposed to thinking you had to micromanage every
Yeah.
footfall they made. So I was
That's
very grateful for that, and
uh,
I've carried that advice with me since then.
that's a great story. That's a great, great story. Now, one of my favorite projects of yours is Trick. I love
Hmm.
that movie. I really, really love that movie. That's another movie that you wrote as well. Now,
Yeah, I wrote with Todd Farmer. Yeah.
yeah, with Todd Farmer. How did you guys come up with the concept of Trick? How did that work?
Uh, we had talked about after Valentine, wanting to do a sequel to Valentine.
Hmm.
Wanting to step back into sort of the slasher world. We had sort of there are elements of Trick that would have been elements of the Valentine sequel. Certainly, the end reveal of Trick was part of what we were originally pitching for Valentine,
Okay.
for how that sequel was going to go, and what had happened to poor Tom Hanniger in the Nut House.
Hmm.
And then we'd also talked about wanting to do. We had written Halloween 3D in 2009. Ultimately, it didn't happen. We were like
Oh,
5 weeks out from shooting it. None of that is in Trick, but it was certainly something, that sort of world we had done a lot of research on, and had been interested in going back into, some sort of seasonal venture. And then wanting to do a killer that was very young and very fast and very agile, and sort of a berserker.
hmm.
That the opening sequence of Trick sort of set the tone for what that killer would be.
Yeah.
And how, he wasn't a slow, sort of stocky,
Mm.
stocky like Stalker, as opposed to like
Yeah.
stocky.
Like Michael Myers. No matter how fast
Yeah,
you
he wasn't
run,
like that.
he will go his pace, and he will always catch up
Yeah,
to
and
you.
it wasn't like Michael Myers, wasn't like Jason, wasn't, we wanted somebody who was incredibly fast and agile, as in a contrast, and then sort of had the little twist mystery at the end, which was something that at one point we thought, is it really a supernatural story? Is it this? And then Todd and I kept kicking around, and arrived at the ending that we arrived at, because that felt like it took us outside,
Hmm.
a lot of the other sort of slasher stories, and gave it its own identity.
And that takes me exactly. Well, you pretty much answered my next question. I was going to ask you, in your mind, what separates Trick from other Halloween slasher films? So, would you say the killer himself is what separates him from other?
Yeah, I,
Yeah.
I I think the killer's agenda is different.
Mm-hmm.
I think the troika of heroes we were very excited by as well, to have, each one sort of has their own sort of storyline. You have Omar Epps' Denver, is basically the beginning, and then his story begins to let go to Ellen Adair, who plays the sheriff, who's very in the middle of the story, who's very much the non-believer,
Yeah.
and then you have the innocent, was played by Christina Reyes, who is the unwilling final girl who comes in at the end, who has
Deal with
to
it.
be baptized
Yeah.
in blood
Mm-hmm.
and face the facts of face her role in the past events. Um, that part really interested us as well. And it was originally when we went in, the budget was twice as much as we ended up making for, and of course we foolishly didn't cut the script back as much as we should have. So our ambitions were twice as much as we had, but that was that's all right. That's the way it usually
That's
is.
the
You
way it
just you
works out.
always you try and reach beyond your grasp and hope for the best.
And do the best with what you have. Now,
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
the killer in Trick, very iconic look with
Mm.
the Two-Face pumpkin mask and the boogeyman makeup underneath. Was that how you guys wrote it into the script, or did you kick around a lot of different ideas on what were you going to make it look like?
The pumpkin mask was something we had in right from the beginning, and the multiple masks, that was part of the original concept. And then it was with Gary Tunnicliffe, who's long been my partner in these kind of cinematic crimes. um, since Dracula 2000, we've worked
Hmm.
together many, many times. And Gary and I were kicking around the masks before, production got, long before the production got going or greenlit. We were just talking about it, and we came up with the two-face mask, the idea of turning the mask around, and sort of that happy sad sort of
Yeah.
thing. And I don't know if you remember an old Hammer movie called Vampire Circus.
I
um,
can't say that I
there
do.
is Yeah, it's an old, I think it's 1972. But in it, there is a clown that has a happy face and then sort of rips it off and has a sad face, and it's very disturbing. And that has always stuck with me. And then when we were kicking around, I thought, well, what if we did something like that? What if
Yeah.
he did that, and then we moved the mask around, and then in his attack sequences, certainly in the beginning, it's really weird because he looks like he's looking both directions all the time.
Yeah.
So that was it just arrived at one of those things, right? It's that sort of creative thing where
It's
you're
like
just
it's
bouncing ideas back and forth. Suddenly there it is.
And what you guys came up with is, like I said, iconic. Now, Jamie
Yeah.
Kennedy and Omar Epps are both Scream alumni. Did you know those guys from previous work experience and brought them in?
Yeah, I had met Jamie several times on Scream and Scream 2. I had not met Omar on Scream 2, but I had worked with Omar on Dracula 2000. So, and always had wanted to work with Omar again,
He's a brilliant
years.
actor. He's a brilliant
He's
actor.
great, and a total pro and very serious about his craft, and a delight to work with. And Carl Dupre, who was one of the writers on Prophecy 3, and I had written something for him specifically a long time ago, sort of a police ghost story thing that ended up not happening. But we had written it specifically for Omar in mind after I'd worked with him. But totally forgot about that project until you just mentioned it. I have to go to that old trunk of script ideas and dig it out
I
and
can
see if
imagine how much scripts you have somewhere locked away.
uh,
Now, when
yes.
you were making Trick, did you try not to fall into any of the Halloween horror movie tropes? Try to avoid them in any way?
You do both things. You try to avoid some and you lean into others, right? It's a mix of things. There's certain things you can't help but do. So you're like, okay, if we're gonna do it, let's just lean all the way in.
Yeah.
And there's other things where you're like, oh, that's let's sort of let's avoid that one. But that's that you sort of do both. You feel your way through it, and it's an ever changing thing, right? The original sequence in the church in where they're watching Night of the Living Dead originally was written for a drive-in until 2 days before we shot it, when there was 60-mile-an-hour winds,
Ooh.
and it was like 20 degrees Fahrenheit, so it was so cold, and we couldn't shoot there. So um, we had used that church as a base camp 2 days before, and so the DP Amanda Trays and I walked in there and said, "Hey, maybe we can shoot here." And within 2 days, the whole crew, we had found a inflatable screen that we could put up in the church, and it turned out that the one of the people who took care, one of the caretakers of the church, was a huge fan of Omar's,
Yeah.
so that helped. And their only thing is we had to be out by, because we were shot on a Saturday, we had to be out by before 10 o'clock service at 10 a.m. So all the sort of bodies and everything had to be cleared out.
I could see the
Before
congregation coming
church.
in and seeing
Oh,
all that. That would have been,
oh yeah.
oh
No,
man,
and the minister was he was very serious about it. He was
I bet.
his warning to us that we were very welcome, but he was very stern. So we didn't want to mess around with that. So we made sure we were out.
Now, your career being primarily in horror, if what would you say is like the key element in writing a good horror script? We see all these horror movies coming out, and everyone is trying to come up with that unique, like Sixth Sense idea with Bruce Willis, you know. And
Yeah.
every couple of years, we get it, you know. I can name movies like, you know, Paranormal Activity, what the Blair Witch
Mm,
Project did for found footage, what Eli Roth did with Hostel.
mhm.
Uh, I mean, everybody's trying to find that next great big surprise. Are there any surprises left to be had? What would you say is the biggest secret to writing a compelling horror thriller script?
I think it's really hard to find, because so many things, they what they become, if they catch that lightning in a bottle and they
Mm-hmm.
you know they start spreading. um you don't know they're going to do that. You don't know
No.
they're going to do that with the Megan. So you just have to tell the best story you can. Try to make your characters as compelling as possible. They don't have to be likable, but you have to want to watch them. Um, Try not to make them dumb.
Yes.
We don't always succeed with that, but that is a thing that I know we all I certainly fight against. It's just like, oh, what would you really do? Would you really do it? Would you
Yeah.
really say I'll be back? Would you really go down in that basement? I don't think I'd go down in that
No. We'd go
basement.
running out the door.
Yeah. So, try to find that sincere heart to it. And the rest of it will, I when we were all making Scream, none of us had any idea what that movie was going to be.
Mm-mm.
I remember Kevin worrying that it might not even be very scary. That we all felt before we previewed it that it was a mystery that worked. The mystery played. But it wasn't until we saw it with an audience that it was like, oh, okay, well, there's something else here that goes beyond us.
If you were to ask
We
me, yeah, if you were
yeah.
to, yeah, go on.
No,
Sorry.
no, no. That's
No, I
that's
was going to say, if you were to ask me what is the element in Scream that really makes it so good, I think it would be hard for me to pinpoint it on one particular thing.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I
Yeah.
think I think it is so many different things that work in that movie. A lot of different directors, when Wes kept turning that down, kept thinking it was more of a comedy than a horror movie. Wes shot that movie straight.
Hmm.
It was a movie that had Kevin wrote brilliantly and had some really fun and funny moments in it. But Wes shot that as a very brutal, straight ahead horror movie.
And I'm sure that was one of the biggest
Yeah,
elements.
I think it, and it was a reaction to so many other things, right? It was a reaction to, I think, the disappointment of Vampire in Brooklyn not being as successful as everybody had hoped,
Hmm.
and how that story had been sort of compromised and in its own way a little bit bloodless.
Yeah.
There were early versions of the Vampire in Brooklyn script that were amazing, but they were too expensive.
Yeah.
So the ending was originally a fist fight on a not a fist fight. It was a huge battle on a tanker truck hanging off the side of the Brooklyn Bridge, and it ended as a fist fight in an apartment. um,
Oh, man.
so and so often, so many of the scary scenes or dramatic scenes in that movie got replaced by dialogue scenes. That's because dialogue was cheaper. So the first cut was like 145 minutes of people talking.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
So
whereas Scream was lean and smart and subversive and vicious and I think Wes really needed that.
well,
I think
that's why Scream is called. It's what revitalized his career.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it arrived. It was the perfect movie at the perfect time. And I think
Exactly.
and I don't think any of us, including him, knew that at the time it was being made.
Hmm.
And I don't think you do
And
when you're making it.
that's the case most often. You don't know when you're
Yeah,
doing it. Now,
yeah.
I got a very specific question for you here. It regards editing. Now, back in the day in the 80s, you can tell what was called back then the B type movies, not only in horror, but in other genre,
Hmm.
by the film quality, okay? Now,
Hmm.
fast forward to 2021, where your smartphone can record better quality video than the best cameras can do in the 1980s. Is there
Hmm.
any excuse, no matter what the budget is for a film, for a movie coming out in today's world to have, unless it's purposely done, to have that very cheap look to it? Unless it's purposely being done on.
It's there's is more. It's always the thing of there's more to it than the gear, right? If it was just about equipment, then anybody could do anything. You
Yeah.
just get the equipment, you do it. There is a level of artistry and education, be that via university or college, whatever, or via experience. That is absolutely vital to something that looks really good, whether it be recorded on an iPhone or recorded on some sort of 70 millimeter Christopher Nolan
Yeah.
extravaganza. It all comes down to, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter about the tools. It's all about your artistry with the tools.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Have
Yeah.
you worked on any modern day projects where the director said, I want to give it a 90s look, filters, maybe a little bit of grain, something like that? They want to give it the older style look?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly something gets talked about. It's often sort of, I've worked with direction photography who've said that to me. And it used to be the whole thing of I want it to look like Blade Runner. Then it was I want it to look like Seven. I needed to be sort of desaturated in this and that and this, and then and ultimately, I think uh, it's the look that works best for the project,
Hmm.
right? It works best for the story. I think it's the same with the score and with the production design and the costumes, and it's all about what works best for the vision of the story and what the characters within the story need to unleash the story that they're part of.
Okay.
And I think there's a variety of different ways to do that. And sure, sometimes it's adding film grain, sometimes it's adding this, sometimes it's adding that, sometimes it's being and I've said this story before. I always remember on Red Eye with Wes, at the time when Fast and the Furious and those movies had come
Hmm.
out, where you go down the car into the engine, out the back, through the tailpipe, out the accelerator, all in one sort of crazy shot. And I asked him if he was going to do any of that on the plane, and he's like, "No, I'm going to shoot close-ups." Um, and Red Eye plays certainly for two-thirds of it like it was a stage play. I
Yeah.
mean, it is all performance. It is all, and actors are the best visual effect you could ever have. They're the best. way to capture an audience. You don't need $90 million in your visual effects budget if you have a great actor
Hmm.
who can just unleash themselves on your story.
Okay. No, I agree with that 100%. Now, I read in a previous interview that you did, I believe, that you and Todd, when you were writing Trick, you wanted to pay homage to the old slasher film, but yet also
Hmm.
pave the way to a new style of slasher. Do you feel, looking back, you guys accomplished that with Trick?
Um, sure. In varying degrees, yes. I think ultimately that's not up for us to even be able to weigh in judgment of.
Mm-hmm.
That's up to the people who see it to say whether we were successful or not. I think, whether we think we were successful at some parts of that and not as successful at other parts, other people may disagree. And it's sort of like once you make it, it's no longer yours, right? It's
Yeah.
it's how you see it, how you perceive it, how the audience takes that in. It becomes as much theirs as anybody else's. I can tell you the intent may be different than your interpretation. That doesn't necessarily make your interpretation wrong. It's just because that's how your experience of it, and my intention in making it, whether I think I succeeded or not. Um, you're always you carry around a sack full of compromises that you made when you made it. And it's just like, but I have all these compromises and it was going to be amazing. And now it's just full of tears. You toss it to one side. So, divorcing yourself from that baggage. So when you ask me, do I feel we succeeded? It's just like, I can't answer
All right, you're right. The
that.
audience and history itself is going to be the judge of that.
Yeah, that's
So,
that's always the case.
so let's talk some more about My Bloody Valentine. Uh, First of all, were you a fan of the original when you took on this
I was,
project?
yeah, yeah. I had worked at a VHS video store in like 1982 to 83, and then again a little bit in 84. And these were all slasher movies were things I would take because you could take movies home for free if they hadn't been rented. So, you take home things home with the
Mm-hmm.
old VHS tapes, which would wrinkle and chew in your thing. But I had watched a lot of those films, and Valentine, growing up as a kid in Canada, Valentine was certainly one of the Canadian tax shelter horror movies, like Terror Train and Prom Night and Happy Birthday to Me.
Speaking of Terror Train, I love Terror Train, and I think it's
Terror
one of the
Train's great.
most underrated Jamie Lee Curtis movies that just doesn't get talked about anymore.
No, and talk about a movie that could be updated,
Mm-hmm.
or you do a new version that's wonderfully period,
Yeah.
that you lean into the period in which it was made.
Oh, I love Terror
Could
Train,
be
and I'm
great fun.
just surprised that people just, you read all these lists of the best horror movies, and you're not going to
Mm.
find Terror Train on any of them, and that's a shame in my opinion. In my opinion,
Well, yeah, I think part of that, is the end of the video store. Um, it's the end of the walking down the aisles and
yeah,
being able to see those titles in your face. You don't see that anymore. And if you're not looking for it,
yeah.
you're not finding it.
Now with streaming, you're so overloaded with content.
Yeah,
Before you sit
yeah,
on the couch to try to watch something, you got to research what you want to watch.
yeah. You got to research, and you're likely going to go for something newer.
Yeah,
You're probably not. You have this movie from 1981. It's these kids on a train, and they're you don't even know to look for.
no, no. A lot
So
of the newer gen doesn't even don't even know that movie exists. But
yeah.
yet you take something like The Fog, which is
Mm.
another Jamie Lee Curtis movie, which is great. But Terror Train is, great as well. But Fog, is it maybe because it's a John Carpenter film?
It's because it has the Carpenter brand, I think,
Yeah,
and let's face it, it has Tom Atkins.
yeah, that's true.
You know,
That's true.
that I feel is the given.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Tom Atkins, I mean, He was
Yeah.
in Halloween. Oh God, listing his movies would be endless.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wanted to keep in My Bloody Valentine besides the whole setting of of the mine coal shaft and all that that you
Mhm.
definitely wanted to keep, and what new elements did you want to bring into your version of My Bloody Valentine?
We Todd and I talked a lot about the original. We were both fans of it. Our opening in the 3D remake we wanted to make sort of like an encapsulated version of the original film.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the an abridgment of the original film in 13 minutes. That was the intent that we went in, and we had lots of homages to the film as we went. And we wanted to be faithful to that and not just hit new territory. We had a version that Zane Smith's first version that he wrote. Axel was still the killer. Axel was not only the killer, but he had the real Harry Warden locked up in his basement.
Oh,
It was
oh
crazy.
man.
And then there was a version after that where the real killer was actually Harry Warden, who had survived and just comes back. And then we really started to focus on the idea of Tom as both a killer and hero, and that really stuck, and it stuck even more so once we cast Jensen,
Mm-hmm.
uh, um, because he embodied that so well. He was somebody who could play a guy who was a real, likable, but maybe a bit of a jerk, but
Mm-hmm.
still a good guy you were rooting for, and had all sorts of emotional issues and had disappeared. And, in my mind, he was always the hero. The reason he survives at the end is totally because it was like, well, yeah, Tom Hanniger's the hero. Tom Hanniger slash Harry Warden,
Exactly.
absolutely hero. He
Exactly.
walks off. And and it really was when we shot the opening sequence, which we shot near the end of the shoot, when they all leave him there, the Sarah Palmer, Axel, and Irene get in a truck and they abandon him to Harry Ward. And that it was that point. It was like, oh, well, he's totally the hero. He's justified to kill all these people. I have no problem with any of that. We wanted to make something that did justice to the title,
Yeah.
weirdly enough, and did justice to the setting and the keeping keeping the minor. We felt the title really informed us of what the movie needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Just lean into it hard.
Yeah.
What we did.
Now, is this the first time you had ever worked with the 3D technology?
Oh God, yeah. I had never even thought of working in 3D before that. And we shot native 3D, so you're shooting with real 3D cameras. Our rigs were built the day before we started shooting, is when they were finished. Almost every day on set, people would say, "Wow, this has never been done before," which was completely and utterly terrifying. Because we were every day was challenged because we only had 4 days on stage. Everything else was out in the world. We shot down in a real mine for like 11 days. All those things were in real spaces with cameras that were like the size of a refrigerator. So it was a fascinating experience to get that movie
Were there
made.
were there any kills that were done in a particular way to amplify the 3D experience?
Pretty much all of them.
Mm.
Certainly, ripping Tom Atkins' jaw off was very much designed to be a 3D kill. A couple of other writers came in and did a little rewrite for us, but they had him falling onto the windshield, thinking that was going to be 3D, and it's just kind of like, and when knowing the size of the camera, it's just like, man, we're never going to get that. That's an impossible thing. So the location, it was weird. The location, almost every one of the kills was rewritten for the locations that we found.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly the scene with Kevin Tighe, out in the porch with the shotgun, and his death with the pickaxe hammered in the floor and his head being pushed onto that. That was rewritten because of the location that we found. We figured out how to make the 3D kills work in the space. The grocery store, these sort of long tunnels. That again was something that we encountered in that space. Tom Atkins ripping his jaw off was something that, in talking to Gary, he came up with that gag and the idea of being able to hook the pickaxe through the bottom jaw and rip it off. And the Tom Atkins head he made, the reset of the jaw was less than 2 minutes because it all fit in with magnets.
Wow.
It was technically an amazing thing to watch at how quickly that worked.
Now,
Yeah.
do you believe that Tom, didn't realize his murderous nature and was sort of like suffering from split personality up until
Yes.
right before the final reveal?
Yes. I believe he and Harry had been riding in the same vehicle for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total
Uh,
sense. Now,
yeah.
Kerr Smith, Jamie King have all been prior guests of ours. I know that My Bloody Valentine was shot like just outside Pittsburgh in coal
Hmm.
mines. Okay,
Yep.
um, what was uh, what was your biggest challenge in shooting in the coal mines as director?
I personally love shooting in the coal mines
Mm,
because we started shooting just after Mother's Day in 2008, and it got really hot by the time we were shooting in the coal mines in June. But when you go underground, it's always like 50 something degrees.
it's a steady
So I
temperature.
I personally love shooting the coal mine. I had no, some people got a little freaked out about it, because there's a lot of earth above you. But I love shooting. The hardest part was lighting. The hardest part because the 3D took like three times of the light at that time. The
Yeah.
digital cameras, the red cameras, the sensors weren't as good as they are now. So you had to have so much light. So everything took longer. The film I just finished, we seem to average somewhere between 60 and 70 setups a day,
Wow.
which was insane. And on Valentine, we were lucky to average 17.
Wow.
So every single thing you did was so key to how to, um, you couldn't waste anything. You had
Mm-hmm.
to, every shot was like, took a lot to get.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So that's
Because
definitely a challenge right there.
yeah.
In the time we have left, Dracula 2000. I love Dracula 2000. Were you surprised by the success, and were you even more surprised that two sequels followed it?
Sure. I mean, surprised. Dracula 2000 is a movie more than any other thing in my career. I recut that movie in my head weekly. I used to be daily. It used to be one of those ones where you stand in the shower and I'd recut it and sort of like hang my head. It's like, oh, why did I do this and why didn't I do that and why did um, um, because there's so many things that aren't in it that should have been in it, and there's so many things that we wrote that Joel and I wrote specifically that didn't get in it. Um, that I was thrilled that it actually found a following and people like the film and like
Hmm.
the twists and turns that are in it. Those all would have been, I think, better in a slightly different version of the movie, but that's
Hmm.
so what. The two sequels were really fun to do because they were made for a fraction of the budget. It's very small. I loved working with Jason Scott Lee. His character was originally written into Dracula 2000
Okay.
and was written out at the request of the studio, who said Uffizi is too cool for this movie. If he's in this movie, he is cooler than anything else.
That's
Uh, um, so when after the movie came out, and only a few months after, they came and said, "Hey, do you guys want to do a direct-to-video sequel?" And Joel and I were like, "Yeah, sure." And they said, "As long as it has Uffizi in it."
ah.
And so we were like, absolutely. And then we pitched them the idea of doing a twofer, like doing the two movies as one. and came up with the second storyline, the sort of
Hmm.
Romanian storyline when we found out we were going to Romania. So the third movie was shot. Most of it was shot before the second.
Now there's a
Uh,
little you brought up
yeah.
the budget. There was like a discrepancy that it was rumored that it cost 2000 cost $54 million to make, but in actuality it was
Not even
28
close.
million.
It was 28. Yeah,
28.
it was 28. It
That's
was
a
28.
big budget. I mean, that's a good
Yeah, it was
budget.
a big budget. It was also a movie that a lot of that budget went into push costs. We originally were going to start shooting in May, and then we couldn't find a Dracula
Oh,
because we couldn't find. And we auditioned probably over 1,000 actors for that role.
damn.
Like the list of the actors who read for Dracula is so long and from all over the world, and people who came back in, and people, and funnily enough, Gerard Butler, he auditioned on the very first day of auditions in April of 2000, and was great. And it was really clear that, oh, this guy has something nobody else had, certainly in that day.
Mm-hmm.
And but he was going off to do Attila the Hun for USA's TV movie, so he wasn't available. So the push in our search to try and find the Dracula that made everybody happy is what led us. We basically ran out the clock on Jerry being in Attila in order to cast him being our Dracula.
Uh,
Both Wes and I would talk about it frequently. We'd come back to the idea of, well, we really think it's this guy. Every time we came close to casting somebody else and it would fall apart or whatever. And Jerry got my phone number, and he would call me from Lithuania. I hear you're casting so and so. You don't want to do that. They'll be terrible. It was, and he and I just hit it off, and we talked several times while he was away, and I kept saying I'm working on it, and then he re-auditioned when he was in Lithuania in full sort of Attila garb, which I think you can see online. I think because it was on the DVD, and
did it have to
uh,
be a unanimous decision on who got to be Dracula? Like
um,
everyone had to agree?
no, no, that's not the case. It was there was some political fallout behind the scenes that happened that allowed me to push for Jerry just as we were about to start shooting,
Okay.
and then we could readjust the schedule to push his character being in the movie for another week if we could get Attila to let Jerry go like 4 days early.
Okay.
So, but an event happened that was sort of a political
Yeah.
clustercluck of the worst order. But the fallout allowed me to. It gave me a card that I could play, and I
Yeah.
played it for Jerry.
That's awesome. Gerard Butler did 300 after
Mm,
Dracula
yes.
2000, right?
Yeah.
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 I mean, that's with Dracula as well, 300, and he's really known for 300.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, you think it was after Dracula 2000 got him the role in Phantom of the Opera. I think
hmm
Schumacher directly saw that, and I think he had done Reign of Fire, he had done Timeline. He had started after
yeah.
TTK was his first big leading role. So, and then people saw, once you see him, it's like, oh, there's a movie star.
He is, yeah. He's a
Yeah,
professional. Now you've had your hand in
yeah.
so many franchises. We're almost out of time. Terminator, the Purge TV show. Speaking of the Purge, I just want to share this with you. I saw the
Mm,
recent one, the new one, the Forever Purge,
mm.
last night. And I don't know if you've seen it yet or not, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's probably one of the better ones in the franchise.
Oh, great.
It's
Oh, I'll definitely check it out.
really, what makes it so good is how it sort of mirrors what's going on in real life today, and of course puts the whole purge element into it. It's scary
Mm.
just because of that, and it's great storytelling. And I know you're a true horror fan, and I think you would appreciate it. So when you get a chance, watch the
Yeah, I'll
Forever
definitely
Purge.
I'll go see it within the next week. I've certainly
Absolutely,
been
yeah,
wanting to see it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
loved working on the TV series. It was a fun world to step into. I think in all the things I've done, my episode of The Purge has the highest body count, and especially in like 44 minutes. I think we kill like 30 some odd people. It was pretty insane.
That is pretty insane. Patrick, we're out of time. Thank you so much. This has been one of the funnest hours I've had. It's been absolute delight talking to you. I loved hearing all the stories you have to share, and I think our audience loved it as well. Thank you so much for coming on
Thank
our
you, John.
show.
This has been, I've really enjoyed it. I had a great time chatting with you. So thank you very much.
It's been awesome. Any final, I mean, you said you're working on a project. Can you share anything with it?
Yeah, I just finished shooting a movie with Bailey Madison and Jerry O'Connell, sort
Okay.
of a
Wow.
horror suspense thriller that's really fun.
Okay.
Very sort of turned out to be a crazy little movie, and we're just in cutting right now, and Gary Tunnicliffe was back on board and created much mayhem.
That's awesome. We'll be looking out for it. Thank you so much, Patrick. My
Thank
executive producer, brother, has been messaging me to make sure I say hello on behalf of him to you. He's a big fan of yours
Well,
as
please
well.
say hello back.
So, hello from my
Yeah.
brother Marco and our executive producer. I want to thank Patrick for joining us, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow. And until then, on behalf of Patrick and myself, stay safe and always stay walking. Good night.